Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the civil service examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily edition dated 17th August 2023. The important topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin our today's session. So this topic has appeared at page number 11 in today's The Hindu Daily edition. The topic reads, "The future will not forgive the government." Now, this topic headlines is very extreme in the sense. However, from the examination's perspective, we need to look at the core content what this topic provides to us. So basically, the immediate context in which this topic has been written by the person is the recent two amendment bills related to the environmental acts. One is the forest conservation, second is the biodiversity conservation. So the Amendment Bill 2023 have been there in these contexts. And as a critical analysis of this, putting forward the arguments showing the drawbacks of these amendments have been written in this article. So first we will be discussing today the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023. Now there are several technical features which have been amended in this particular act, that is the Forest Conservation Act 1980. So this amendment bill aims to amend this particular act. However, from the examination's perspective, we need to be aware about the 4 to 5 key important features which we will be discussing, as well as what are the various issues which are related to these amendments. So therefore, we should restrict our discussion to the examination's perspective only and not going by the political arguments which are there in this article. So first let us see that what is the aim of the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023. Basically, it aims at amending the Forest Conservation Act 1980. Now, what was the objective of Forest Conservation Act? As the name is suggesting, it is basically aimed at conserving the forests. So, how to conserve the forest? Obviously, in order to conserve the forest, you need to retain the original forest lands, right? How can you retain the original forest lands? One is that you do not go for any developmental activities on the forest lands, and hence you can manage the original, you can retain the original forest lands. That is the developmental activities, for example, the roads, rails, industries, etc. are not there in the forest area, so that there is no deforestation, right? The other way is, if it is very necessary to go for all these developmental activities, which we all understand that for the economic progress of our country, to increase the livelihood opportunities, to increase the income levels, the infrastructure creation is must. So if we have to construct this infrastructure on the forest land, then alternate afforestation activities must be taken in some other area. So that means that if you are cutting a tree in a particular forest to lay down a road, the same or more amount of trees must be planted in some other regions so that the overall number of trees, the overall forest land remains the same, right? However, we can understand that this second approach has some flaws, because when you cut the original forest, you cannot replicate the same forest in some other areas. So that is why it is said that as far as possible, the original land must be retained and we must prohibit the developmental activities in those areas. And even if the developmental activities have to be taken in those areas, then they should be properly regulated. So in order to regulate these things, the Forest Conservation Act 1980 was passed, and the Amendment Bill of 2023 also deals with such things, right? But now, as we all know, that government is heavily focusing on ease of doing business. Sometimes government felt that the strict provisions of the Forest Conservation Act comes in a way in order to go for the developmental activities, because of which there is a backwardness in many areas, and therefore it came up with certain provisions. The first and the foremost important key feature of the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023 is that it provides certain exceptions to the certain land areas. For example, the 100-kilometer areas along the international borders of India have been exempted. Now what does it mean? Now let us imagine that This is the international borders, right? The western international borders. Here we have Pakistan. So the range that is up to 100 kilometers from these international borders, there will be certain exemptions, which means that, for example, if the border road organization, let's say, have to construct a road in this particular area, or let's say the signals team wants to establish certain signals for the purpose of proper communication. Similarly, army want to establish its own base camp for which it requires building of certain permanent infrastructure. So that is why, in order to enhance the security of our country, the government in this amendment bill says that there will be certain relaxations, certain exemptions, that if there has to be a deforestation within the area of 100 kilometers from these international borders, then certain formalities can be relaxed, basically in order to enhance the security. So this is what this exemption talks about, that there are certain exemptions provided to construct the infrastructure for the security purpose in the area of 100 kilometers from the international borders. Right? So this was the first key feature. Second key feature is related to the central approval for all the entities. Now earlier in this Forest Conservation Act, the state governments seek the approval of the central governments whenever they have to divert the forest land to the non-forest use purposes. This permission, this approval was sought by the center in case this land was diverted and was given to the private entity, right? So the other entities, for example, the PSUs or the state PSUs, this was not applicable to them because it was only applicable to the private entities. But now, in order to strengthen the forest conservation, this amendment bill says that for all the entities, the central approval is necessary, right? Then come to the third provision. It says that certain activities in the forests are permitted. For example, creation of zoos, promoting safaris, ecotourism, construction of bridges, etc. So there are certain activities which are listed in this amendment bill which are allowed. And the fourth is that center is allowed to issue the directions to the state governments in order to implement the provisions of this amendment bill, right? So these are four most important features of the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill which you can as it is write in your mains answer. However, now we shall discuss that what are various issues involved in it. The first and the foremost issue is the biodiversity in the northeastern region. As we have discussed that the first provision was the exemptions related to the 100-kilometer border. We discussed here with the example of the northwestern border of India. Now, if we take the example, let's say, of the northeastern border, that is Sikkim, Arunachal and all the other, the seven sisters of the northeastern, because here we are sharing the border with Myanmar, here we are sharing the border with Bangladesh, and here we are sharing the border with China. So this particular northeastern region is sharing international border with three main countries. Also, this region is very rich when it comes to biodiversity as well as the forest areas. And now because the relaxations have been provided within the zone of 100 kilometer, so from all these international borders, let's say 100 kilometer, 100 kilometer and then 100 kilometer, experts feel that this exemption of 100 km from the international borders can have a very detrimental effects on the biodiversity as well as forest conservation when it comes to the northeastern region. So this is the first issue when it comes to the biodiversity of the northeast. The second issue is related to the blanket exemption for the zoos. Now the amendment bill, as we have discussed, provide relaxations to create certain activities, for example, to create certain zoos in the forest areas. Now you yourself think, what do we know with our basics? There are two modes of conservation. One is the in situ conservation, other is the ex situ conservation. In situ conservation is the most preferred way of biodiversity conservation. What do we mean by in situ conservation? That is on-site conservation. For example, the creation of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, conserving the forest lands, all these are the on-site conservation, that is conserving the biodiversity on their natural site. This is the in situ way of conservation. Next is the ex situ mode of conservation, which means that you are not conserving the biodiversity in their natural habitat, rather you are creating an artificial habitat, for example zoos. So zoo is not a natural forest, it is a man-made forest, it is a man-made area, and hence the biodiversity, that is flora and fauna, which needs to be conserved, is taken out from their natural sites and transported to these artificial sites, and hence it is known as ex situ conservation. But now, because in order to promote conservation, this amendment bill is coming up with creation of zoos, that is ex situ conservation within a forest. So this is the forest and now this is the zoo. So what is the rationale of creating zoos within the forest? Because it is a direct conflict between the two modes of conservation itself. The third provision is related to the Supreme Court judgment on deforestation in 1996. The Supreme Court said in its judgment that the forests include all those areas which are recorded as forest in the government document. Also, the forest will be recognized as forest even if it is a deemed forest. Now, what do we mean by deemed forest? Basically, deemed forest means that, let's say, if there is an area which is having a trees having a threshold level of canopy and density, it might happen that this particular area is not recorded as a forest in the government data. So what does this mean? Does it give the permission to that they can cut down this forest? No. Supreme Court said that we have to follow the concept of the forest in latter and spirit. So that means that even if there is a certain area which by the dictionary meaning can be constituted as a forest, despite the fact it is not recorded as a forest in the government data, even then the Forest Conservation Act should be applied on these areas also. But then this amendment bill goes against the Supreme Court judgment on deforestation, as it stipulates that only those lands that was notified as forest under the Indian Forest Act 1927 or any other relevant law were recorded as forest in the government records will be acknowledged as forest under the act as well. So basically this amendment bill has reduced the definition of the forest itself, right? And the fourth major issue is, as we have seen, that this amendment bill is relaxing certain norms in relation to certain activities. So the expert says that one size fits all approach must not be followed, and therefore this amendment bill has a lack of case by case examination facility. So we cannot go for the absolute prohibition. Also, we cannot go for the absolute allowance, and hence there has to be a balance. Now, to ensure that balance, case by case examination must be there and not the one size fits all approach, because the biodiversity in the northwestern India is very much different from the biodiversity of the northeastern India, right? So these are certain issues which several experts have pointed out in relation to the amendments of the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023. Now in this relation, there is one practice question for all of you. You can brainstorm on this question on your own. How far do you think that Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023 will be able to conserve the forests? So in this you have to bring out both, that is pros as well as cons, in order to analyze the Forest Conservation Amendment Bill 2023 in the context of really conserving the forest. So just brainstorm the points on your own. This topic has appeared at page number 13. The topic is in relation to the recently launched scheme known as the Vishwakarma scheme, and this is the very immediate context of this article. Now, as far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, every year, especially in the prelims examination, the questions related to the government schemes, especially the central sector schemes, are asked. So that is why this topic will be covered in today's session from the prelims examinations perspective. The immediate context of this topic is that recently the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, which is chaired by Prime Minister, has approved a new central sector scheme known as PM, that is Pradhan Mantri Vishwakarma. Now there are two terms, one is the central sector scheme and one is the central sponsored scheme. When it comes to the central sponsored schemes, the funding of that scheme is divided between center and states. But when it is central sector scheme, that means the complete funding is provided by the central government. So in this regard, in the context of this particular scheme, let us look at certain key facts. First is the total financial outlay for this PM Vishwakarma scheme is rupees 13,000 crore, and the duration of this particular scheme is for 5 years from 23 to 24 financial year ending to 27 to 28th financial year. So during these 5 years this scheme will be implemented. As it is very clear from the name, that is Vishwakarma. Now Vishwakarma is basically famous for the skills, and hence the basic aim of this scheme is to nurture the Guru Shishya Parampara, or the family based practice of traditional skills by artisans as well as the craftspeople. Now who are those artisans and craftspeople? Altogether, 18 traditional trades have been identified by this scheme. For example, carpenters, boat makers, armorers, blacksmiths, hammer and toolkit makers, goldsmiths, locksmiths, cobblers, etc. So there are total 18 traditional trades. This scheme also aims at improving the quality and the reach of the products not only in the domestic market but also in the foreign markets. And therefore, the services as well as the product qualities will also be enhanced. Now, as a matter of recognition, the PM Vishwakarma certificates and ID cards will also be provided. Credit support, that is loan, is also given by the government up to rupees 1 lakh the first tranche and rupees 2 lakh for second one. And also these loans will be provided at the concessional interest rate of 5%. So that means that these loans are not free, that is they are not grants. Support is not free of cost. There is a rate of interest, but that is just 5%, which means that there is a concessional rate regime. The scheme will further provide skill upgradation, toolkit incentives, digital transactions, as well as marketing support. Basically, this is a central sector scheme for this duration, having this budget, aiming and focusing at the traditional skills. This topic has appeared at page number 23, the last page of today's The Hindu Daily edition, and the topic is in relation to the lake Titicaca, the falling water levels in this particular lake. Now again, this topic is mainly relevant from the prelims examinations perspective. For example, if you go by the previous year question paper analysis, you will see that in 2018, the UPSC has already asked the question in relation to the certain seas which have made news in that particular year. The question said that which of the following has or have shrunk immensely or dried up in the recent past due to human activities. Aral Sea, Black Sea, Lake Baikal. So that means that lakes and seas which are in news in any particular year becomes important from the UPSC prelims examinations perspective, and hence Lake Titicaca we shall be looking at certain key facts regarding it. First and the foremost is that this Lake Titicaca is located in the continent of South America. This Lake Titicaca is bordered by two countries, that is Peru as well as Bolivia. It is the second largest lake of South America, the first largest lake being Lake Maracaibo. It is also bordered by young folded mountain range which is known as Andes. And these Andes, that is young folded mountains, is formed basically due to the convergence or the collision of tectonic plates. Which are those two plates? One is the Pacific plate and other is the South American plate, which means that one is the ocean plate and second is the continental plate. So basically Andes mountains is the result of ocean continent convergence. And we all know that because oceanic plates are denser in nature and continental plates are lighter or rarer in nature, so that is why this denser plate subducts whenever there is a collision, and this lighter plate goes up folding and crumbling, leading to the formation of mountain ranges, which in this particular case is the Andes mountains. So these are certain key facts related to the Lake Titicaca from prelims perspective. This topic has appeared at page number 1 in today's The Hindu Daily edition. The topic reads, Cabinet nod for 10,000 electric buses in 169 cities. So that is very clear from the topic headline that this article is basically dealing with the electric vehicles. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic has an intersection of science and tech as well as environment, and both lying in General Studies Mains Paper 3. So in today's session, we are going to discuss that what are various types of electric vehicles, what are the challenges with the adoption of electric vehicles, and what can be a way ahead in order to promote this electric vehicle industries or electric vehicles as such in India. So primarily there are four types of electric vehicles. One is the hybrid vehicle, second is the complete or the full electric vehicles, third is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and fourth is the fuel cell electric vehicles. Basically, what do we understand by the electric vehicles? That the engine of these vehicles is deriving its energy from the electricity, right? Now, how this electricity is being produced differs in all these type of electric vehicles. For example, when it comes to the hybrid type of electric vehicle, this electricity is produced by the ICE, which stands for the internal combustion engine, right? So here there is a electricity driven vehicle, but who is producing that electricity is the internal combustion engine. These electric vehicles have typically small batteries having the storage capacity of around 1 to 5 kilowatt hour. They basically act as the buffer. There is no charging from the grid, which means that these small batteries cannot be charged from the grid. So these are the important components of the hybrid vehicle. Comparing this to the other extreme, that is the complete or the full electric vehicle, here there is no internal combustion engine. All the electricity is coming from the battery. That is why these batteries have to be very large. Their power range around 20 to 120 kilowatt hour. Now just see the difference, because here the electricity was being produced by the ICE, therefore a very small battery was required. But here there is no ICE and electricity is produced by this battery. That is why it needs to be a storage battery. It cannot be just a buffer. It will be the primary material to supply the electricity, and hence a large battery is required. And because the battery is very large, it can only be charged from the grid. Here there was no charging from the grid, one extreme. Here there is another extreme, it can only be charged from the grid. Third one are the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. They have the storage of battery around 5 to 15 kilowatt hour. That is more than this one but less than this one. And they can also be charged from grid because their storage is slightly on a higher side, right? So we can say that plug-in hybrid vehicles are basically the full electric vehicles when they are running on battery, because they can be charged on grid. So that is why plug-in hybrid vehicles is basically a mixture of hybrid as well as the full electric vehicles, right? These full electric vehicles are also known as plug-in EVs. So here, because the name is plug-in hybrid, hence the mixture of both the components. Last one is the fuel cell electric vehicles. Here the electricity is produced by the fuel cell, and again here also a small battery is used, which basically is aimed at providing the buffer, and therefore it stores a very less amount of energy, right? So four types: hybrid, complete, complete hybrid, and fuel cell EV. So these are four types of electric vehicles. So if you have understood the basics, the science of these electric vehicles, that what are various types, now we shall be moving towards the challenges as well as the way ahead part. First, we shall discuss the challenge. The first and the foremost challenge is the availability of the charging infrastructure. Countries like India and other developing as well as the LDCs countries, they lack in charging infrastructure. We are all aware about the biggest challenge of the electric vehicle is that In one charge, these vehicles can move only up to few hundred kilometers, that is around 300 kilometers. Now, because the consumer behavior is such that, especially in the developing countries like India, that they have only one vehicle which they use for the short distances as well as for the long distances. So, in developing countries where the per capita income is slightly on the lower side, there people cannot afford to have two vehicles, that is, one for short distance and one for long, and hence they have one vehicle. So that is why on the long trips, because the range is restricted for the EVs, they would be requiring continuous support of the charging infrastructure so that they can charge their vehicles, right? But in developing countries, we do not have this charging infrastructure, right? Second is the cost and capital. Now, investment in these electric vehicles is very huge in terms of research and development, in terms of mining lithium, in terms of grid connection. Also, we know that on an average, the electric vehicles cost more than the traditional vehicles. In order to set up the electric vehicle industry, a huge amount of capital is required because it will be based on lot of automation, lot of raw material, lot of forward and backward linkages. That is why cost and capital shoots up for the electric vehicles. The third challenge is related to the grid connection. Again, as we discussed about the full electric vehicles which can only be charged from the grid, the challenge in the developing country is that this grid connection is not available in every region. For example, there can be regions having very rugged terrain, topography, the tribal areas, the desert areas, okay, certain remote locations where still the grid connection is not available. So how can we go for the full electric vehicle which is only dependent on the grid connectivity? Only they can be charged from the grid, right? So this is a challenge. Next is the rupee depreciation. For example, in India, we know that rupee has depreciated to a huge extent. If the rupee is depreciating, then if we want to import the batteries, so the cost of this import is also going to rise, right? So battery import, similarly, if we have to import lithium as a raw material or semiconductors which will be used in them, again it will be dependent on import, rupee depreciation issue. Then comes the raw material, because such type of raw materials like lithium, other rare earth metals, all the critical minerals are mainly stored in few countries. For example, China, Australia, South American countries like Bolivia, Chile, Argentina. Similarly, few are also found in Canada as well as US. So the thing is that because this raw material is so unevenly distributed, that it poses a huge challenge for rest of the world. Then specifically to India, the policy imperatives, there are very high GST rates on the electric vehicles. So all these challenges make the adoption of electric vehicles very difficult in India. In this relation, now we shall look at the way ahead, that what steps can be taken. One is establishing the industries. For this, there should be ease of doing business. There should be adequate incentives to the industrialists so that they come to India and establish their industries. The second important component here from General Studies Mains Paper 1, that is location of industries, it says that we need to identify most promising regions to establish these industries. For example, when we go to the rural areas, the type of electrification of the vehicles must be required in tractors, harvesters, combiners, threshers, etc. On the contrary, when we come to the urban regions, then the electrification of vehicles must be in cars, buses, scooters, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, etc. Right? Also, these industries can be developed on the west coast and east coast, that is the coastal cities, because these coastal regions will be importing the raw material from other countries, and hence it will be more profitable to establish the industries in coastal areas. So the point is that we must take certain policy directions to establish the electric vehicle industries in India. Right. Second is in relation to various other policy initiatives. For example, the government can combine the FAME, which is dedicated towards the electric vehicles, as well as the AIM, which stands for Atal Innovation Mission, that is innovation. And that is why this point can be closely associated with the research and development, because government should increase the investment in research and development. India still spends less than 1% in its research and development. So this is a huge issue. Similarly, government must promote and strengthen the IPR protection regime, because this is a new sunrise industry. A lot of innovation, research and development is going on. In order to incentivize the innovative minds in our country, IPR protection regime must be very strong. Similarly, the subsidies can be provided to the end consumers on the electric vehicles cars in order to balance the extra cost which the consumer has to pay vis-a-vis the traditional vehicles. Similarly, production linked incentives scheme can be provided to the industrialists. The basic thing is that whenever we have to boost any industry, there should be incentives given to all the stakeholders in different manner. Only then we can have a kickstart. Similarly, there should be mining reforms, more privatization can be there, transparent auctioning, as well as accountability mechanisms. For all these mining operations, there should be a very good center-state relations. Next, India must focus towards the international cooperation, which it can do from two aspects. One is the bilateral one, and other are the regional cooperations. So it must have a very good relations with the countries who are having the raw material reserves with them. And last is the awareness. There should be a sensitization drive of the consumers so that they become aware about the challenges like climate change and how buying the electric vehicles in the long run can balance that extra cost which they need to provide initially while buying the EVs, right? So all these steps can be written in your answer as the way ahead to promote the electric vehicle industry. This is today's lead article, which has appeared at page number 8. The topic reads, An Act to Cement the Digital Authoritarianism. This topic is all about the data protection law. And this topic has already been explained in detail in the DNS dated 6th August 2023 by Mr. Ankit Singh. So you people are requested to go back to the DNS dated 6th August in order to understand all the important dimensions associated with the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2023, whereby he has discussed in detail regarding all the important features, that what do we mean by individuals, that is data principals, how data principals are different from data fiduciaries, what is the penalty in case of certain breaches of the law. Further, along with these features, Mr. Ankit Singh has also discussed in detail that what are various issues related to the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2023 in terms of powers of the Data Protection Board, central government, dilution of the Right to Information Act, various exemptions, as well as the conflict between Section 43A of the IT Act 2000. So in order to understand this topic holistically, again you are requested to go back to the DNS dated 6th August 2023. So today's lead article was our reference article. This was all for today. All the very best and study hard.